This is KBACH First Take, and I'm Michael Keelan. I'm talking with violinist Matthew Detrick, who's also the founder of the Apollo Chamber Players. Their new album is of largely active composers, and it deals with questions of democracy. What is this album about, Matthew?
We're very proud of this album, We the People, because it represents, I think, what we do best as Apollo Chamber players, using music to tell stories. This isn't just a classical music history album. We love playing the classics, and we have a little bit of Beethoven on there with a contemporary take. But this is also about American history, immigration history, and our shared cultural history. So this album, I think, brings all of these threads together as we celebrate the beautiful complexity of America at 250 years old.
These pieces of music have different relationships of text to the music, since a lot of them have text in them. It's sung, it's spoken, it's even whispered. Can you address the different ways the text is used in these pieces?
That's a great question, Michael. And I think, one of the things we've been leaning into over the past few years, particularly, is spoken word elements and working with Houston Poet Laureates and kind of using the medium of voice to tell the story. And I think also it's interesting to talk about in this moment when everyone is talking about AI as artificial intelligence. What we're trying to do instead is explore what I like to call ancestral intelligence. So particularly with the opening commission on this album, And Still We Cross by Daniel Bernard Romaine. This really was birthed from a conversation with Kenneth Morris, who's the living descendant of both Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, these seminal American figures. What I think what's so powerful in his expression of what they mean and what they meant then, what they mean today, is that he talks about how their blood runs through my veins, and using that as kind of an inspiration on how we can tackle today's challenges and issues, or at least have a little bit of reflection on what we're all living through, I think is very powerful. And I think that the spoken word element, in his voice is so powerful in a way you can just kind of hear Frederick Douglass emanating from his words. I think is one of the reasons why we led the album with this track.
What pieces were written for the album? You referred to the Romaine being a commission.
All of these pieces have been commissions from the past couple of years. Our last album was titled "Banned Stories of Censorship," around censorship of identity, of book banning, revisionism of Black American history. So I think we were touching on some really important and provocative issues. We had George Takei a part of that album, and I think it was a really hopefully nice pivot to telling the story of America as we celebrate this country at 250 years, like I mentioned. So putting together and weaving and intermingling these different commissions together. These weren't all just for this album, I think, is the answer to your question. But we like to tell stories through the commissions and through the music that we choose for our studio albums for a worldwide audience.
Speaking to the relationship between past and contemporary music, there's one piece inspired by Beethoven using the Seventh Symphony very substantially. I think back to college when my composer friends would grouse that there should mainly be new music on concert programs. We don't need to hear another Beethoven symphony. We need more new music, since concerts in his time were largely new music. So as far as your ensemble is concerned, what's the relationship between programming new and historical music?
Well, I love that question, Michael, and I know you're a history buff as well. Again, we love playing the traditional composers, Beethoven, Brahms, especially Dvorak, and their music obviously has stood the test of time on its own and has its certain intrinsic beauty. But what I think is really important too is looking at the context of the time in which these pieces were written and the composers were living in. Beethoven, I think, had a lot of commonality with the American revolutionary, founders of America. They were products of this same Enlightenment worldview, influenced by reason and human dignity and liberty and self-determination. And I think that, thinking about those ideas, Beethoven's music embodies many of these same ideals that inspired the American experiment. So it was kind of a natural, it was just a natural collaboration with Tracy Silverman we did a couple of years ago. ask him to actually I remember asking him what his favorite Beethoven piece was, and I said, "Hey, why don't you arrange something around that?" And he came back with the famous Seventh Symphony. And a little personal side too. I remember, just how powerful the music of Beethoven is. I remember being 9 or 10 years old and hearing the second movement, the famous funeral dirge of the Seventh Symphony, and just being transfixed with the music and how that made me feel. And so I feel like bringing that same piece into the 21st century through the contemporary style of Tracy Silverman, I think it is really powerful.
The album includes a performance from the choir of a performing arts high school in Houston. Can you describe their role?
Yes, and it's really interesting talking with various people about this album and kind of I think orchestras and ensembles are trying to figure out how we can connect with young people. And a lot of times that means going to schools and performing and maybe doing some teaching. And I think that's all wonderful. But we wanted to take this a step further, a couple steps further, if you will, and actually collaborate with these students, these young people, 17, 18-year-old students, and make them co-creators of this commission. So the original DNA synthesis of this was asking them to write essays and poems on what democracy means to them, and obviously, their view of the world is very different than mine as a 45-year-old white male, and I'm sure for the people of older generations too. So from that, Marcus Moroney, this faculty composer at University of Houston, took those words by the students, created this libretto for what became The Color Blue. And I think it's just such a powerful testament to what young people are thinking about democracy, what they're thinking about the world today. And there's hope embedded in there as well. I think the music stands on its own as well. Marcus is very inspired by composers like Britten, and you can hear a little bit of that kind of 20th century melancholy and fierceness, if you will. But then there's also many different layers of complexity and beauty, I think, embedded in this new commission, which was also a collaboration with the chorale at HSPVA as well. So it's students singing their colleagues' ideas on democracy, and I think that it just kind of weaves together a really important way that we can engage with the young people today.
What are some of the orchestrational sounds that take place in that piece, The Color Blue, for someone who listens and doesn't know about stringed instruments?
Well, sure. I think the composer Marcus does a really great job of highlighting the string quartet. So a string quartet and a choir of 16 in the chorale. And there's some moments where it's just string quartet, and I think it's very kind of Benjamin Britten like. Maybe some Shostakovich sounds in there. He uses some extended techniques, ponicello and pizzicato, and so maybe a little bit of rough edges there that we're getting out of our instruments. And then juxtaposes that with some beautiful melodies with the different instrumentation of the choir. These voices and the words of these young people set to music can hopefully be some sort of antidote and inspiration for the future.
As a native Nebraskan, I had to notice the presence of our de facto home composer, Howard Hansen, on the end of the album. How did this fellow who hasn't been around in a few decades make it on here?
Well, I think it's interesting. A lot of our commissions are original compositions by composers, but in this album in particular, there are a couple of adaptations, and this is one of them. I think it's really amazing. The other one is John Corigliano's One Sweet Morning, which was originally for full orchestra, and he adapted it for string quintet and countertenor John Holliday, who's a really wonderful countertenor. And so I just think there's different ways to layer commissions and adaptations, and this monumental orchestral piece that's inspired by it's based on Walt Whitman's poetry. I played this in an orchestral setting before, and it really is so powerful. I thought to myself, I wonder if we could make a smaller version of this, and it would then reach more people and be easier to program, and still have the same power and beauty as the original version. So I wanted to end the album with a little bit more of a hopeful note, and I think that Hansen's Song of Democracy was kind of the perfect bookend to this story of We the People.
The new album is We the People with the Apollo Chamber Players, and I've been talking with Matthew Detrick, the founder and a violinist for the group. Thanks very much for talking with us on First Take
Hey,
today.
hey, thanks, Michael. And if you want one little other anecdote here, I love talking about how Houston is one of the most culturally diverse cities in the nation. But it's also great that Houston and Phoenix are America's fourth and fifth largest cities, respectively.
Right.
And I think that it's really great that both of these cities, these growing cities, are proving that classical music isn't confined to the traditional coastal centers. There's innovation happening in the heartland of America, and not just New York and LA.